Welcome, everyone. Good evening in Damascus. I'm really pleased. It's the first time I'm talking to Tarik Cyril Amar, historian, geopolitical analyst, BA in modern history from Oxford. I want to talk to you about the academic world at some point. Author of The Paradox of Ukrainian Lviv, a borderland city between Stalinists, Nazis, and Nationalists. Again, I would love to get you on to talk more about that, but we're going to focus on the Middle East today. And I was having a look at your, I still call it Twitter, but your X page. And I saw one post from you which says Palestine must be liberated from genocidal terror apartheid state of Israel. If that requires a war, then that's what humanity owes Palestine. So I think that's a very good starting point for our conversation. Welcome, Tarik.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for your very kind introduction too.
All right, you're most welcome, and I hope we can talk many times again in the future. You mentioned this, Palestine must be liberated from the oppressive genocidal state of Israel, or as I call it, or everyone here calls it, we don't recognize the state of Israel, of course, inside Syria, the Zionist entity or the colonial settler entity. If that requires a war, then that's what humanity owes Palestine. Can you just perhaps explain what you mean by that? Because I guess some people in the West, although they might support the Palestinian cause and stand in solidarity, are they aware, as in my opinion, that there is potential of this global war that will eventually be for the sake of Palestine is going to affect everyone?
Well, you know, when I wrote that particular post,
Mm,
I did it very deliberately, and I mean it. I stand by every word.
mm,
But I can explicate a little bit what was behind it, right, and
mm,
what is behind it. Um, One thing is that I am absolutely convinced, and I think this is quite easy to see that the treatment, if that is even the word anymore,
mm.
of the Palestinians by both Israel and by the collective West is the single most egregious crime currently happening on the planet.
Yeah.
I would challenge people to name another one that's bigger or even as big as that one. I don't think there is one. It is the theft, or rather the armed robbery of a country that belongs to the Palestinians and has been taken away from them.
Mm.
It has come with repeated waves of ethnic cleansing, with clear aspects of genocide, and we have just now completed another phase of an escalated genocide of 1 year in Gaza. And of course, while Gaza is, so to speak, the inner circle of this hell, right?
Yeah.
Uh, all the other things that Israel is doing to the Palestinians everywhere it can are still going on around it and are in fact also escalating, for instance, in the West Bank.
Mm.
So there is the enormity of this crime, and I know that many people in the West are in very severe psychological and intellectual denial about this fact, and it is a fact.
Mm.
But there also is something else, which is what would be the correct and the only, I think, in the end, efficient answer, right? And um, I have an enormous beef with people who claim to be progressive or on the left or whatever, and who still talk of the two-state solution.
Yes.
I can almost understand it, almost, because I'm a historian, and historians have an inbuilt weak spot for political leaders, unfortunately. So, political leaders who cannot yet bring themselves to go farther than that, well, but progressives and leftists and people who claim to stand outside, against the system, as it were, they really have to abandon this. The two-state solution is completely unrealistic. That's one thing. It is unethical because even if it were to take place, after what the Israelis have systematically and for decades done, and now done again in horrendously escalated fashion to the Palestinians, it is absolutely impossible to demand that the Palestinians live next to these guys. And that is the two-state solution, the idea that the Palestinians, after everything that has been done to them, can still go without at least half of the land that is actually theirs by right, can live in the rest and live with these neighbors. And when you hear the politicians, the worst ones, who
Mm.
talk about the two-state solutions, when they do, such as the Germans, right, if they do at all, then they make it very clear that they expect this Palestinian state that they sometimes deem to imagine to be completely defenseless.
Yes.
I try to explain this to people like imagine Europe, 1945.
Mm.
The war in Europe is over, maybe not yet in Asia, but in Europe, Nazism has been defeated. You gather the Jewish survivors of the Holocaust and you say to them, we have a country for you, it's very small, and you can't have an army in it, and it's right next to the Germans. Excuse me? That is an insane idea. And it
Yes.
is part of our enormous racism towards the Palestinians, who we simply do not take seriously. We, as in the ordinary Westerners, right? Not me or you.
Mm.
But it is part of this Western racism towards the Palestinians that we think that Palestinians can be given that sort of pseudo solution, right? And so that was partly behind this tweet. I really wanted to say, I absolutely don't believe in this. I think it is now crystal clear. It's been clear for a long time. It took me too long to get there, by the way, right? I admit my own mistakes in the past. Um, but it is absolutely clear that there is no two-state solution. Even if the Israelis were ever honest about it, which they have never been. This is the third point. How do you have a two-state solution with somebody who is an accomplished, obsessive, persistent liar all the
Yeah.
time? Even if you got to a two-state solution with the Israelis, you would know all they're doing is arming for the day when they take your state away again.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So that there's nothing there. None of this makes any sense on any level, politically, intellectually, ethically. The two-state solution is ridiculous.
Mm.
So the only solution that we have to this problem is the full-scale liberation. And so if full-scale liberation is what we need, look, the way Israel behaves and the way Israeli society, and I don't mean the elite, and I don't mean just the state, I mean the society. We have enough evidence.
Mm.
Large parts of Israeli society are psychotic, sadistic, militaristic, completely insane, and
Yeah.
incredibly racist. And I don't think that this type of society will give up without a very hard fight. Maybe we are lucky. Maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe if they're hit by a few more volleys of rockets, they will all run away. I don't know. I dare not hope that.
Mm.
I'm pessimistic in that I think they will insist on a large-scale fight until they're finally driven and thrown out as they have to be.
Yes.
And one last point. I know I'm talking too long. I was just listening today to a very interesting small interview with an Israeli political economist who I actually really appreciate.
Mm.
And I sort of misremember his name right now, so I won't quote it, but he's written about, among other things, the privatization of so-called security in Israel.
Right.
And I really like his stuff. And he is as good as it gets from within Israeli society. He's very much a dissident, right?
Yeah.
But after all he had said, he came down to, well, the future that I imagine is something like the South African solution. I'm sorry. The South African solution, that ship has sailed. There is
Exactly.
no South African solution for Israel. The Zionists will not stay in the country, and neither will any Israelis who don't accept living under Palestinian rules, under equality, under a Palestinian government, under Palestinian laws, and after those many Israelis who have committed crimes are punished after being sentenced in Palestinian courts.
Mm.
All of this will have to happen. And if a Palestinian state of the future then thinks everybody who's ready to live with that can stay, that's their business. That's very humane. That's very kind. I hope they will be so kind. It's superhuman. But the idea that this Israeli society can just stay in place after what they have done to the Palestinians is absurd. Absurd.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you say, if after the Second World War, I mean, we know actually that the West absorbed a lot of the Nazi monsters that fled and ended up in America, helping the Americans to develop their mind-bending experiments and chemical weapons and so on, and ended up in multiple sectors of industry and society across Europe, the UK, and the US.
Oh, they also rebuilt the West German armed
Yeah,
forces,
yeah,
full of ex-Nazi generals, and they also had a major role in rebuilding West German intelligence. These are cold
yeah,
hard facts. That's
yeah,
how it was done.
exactly. And so, I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and they were comparing, they were talking about history, and they were saying, well, what's going to happen to the Zionists is what happened to the Nazis. And I'm afraid my response was, well, I hope not. Because in my opinion, the Zionist entity should be completely dismantled. The West should de-Zionize their nations, because the state capture by the Zionist movement is, for me, also a big concern in the UK
I
and the US and
I
the
could not
EU.
agree more. Absolutely.
And so therefore we didn't do a very good job at the end of the Second World. And I'm
No,
sure you're a
no.
historian. I'm quite sure you can add more complexities and nuance to that statement. But that's my fear, and you're absolutely correct. And so therefore I don't see any resolution of this without actually the war that we're all facing, because this entity has to be complete. And I'm not calling for, people get very emotional about this subject because they assume that you're calling for ethnic cleansing of
Uh,
Israeli Jews and
yes,
so on. No,
yes,
I'm not. I'm calling for the end of the Zionist movement. And the
yes,
Zionist movement is an ethno-supremacist, racist, elitist, Western supported. It's not even a proxy anymore. I see it like Frankenstein's monster, and the monster has outgrown its creator, you know?
yes,
And so therefore, people really need to understand that this isn't just supporting Palestine when Palestine is in victimhood. It's
yeah,
about
yeah,
supporting Palestine in its victory over 100 years oppression and torture and rape and abuse,
yes,
and now full-blown genocide. It's always been a genocide.
yeah,
I've in the past called it a trickle genocide,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's been maintained for the last 100 years
yeah,
without any respite.
yeah,
And so therefore, as you said, this is one of the worst situations I can remember in history, to be quite honest. We have this, I'm afraid, this hierarchization of the Holocaust. But if we look at now what is happening, and for how long it's been happening, and as you said, the levels of sadism that are being used against the Palestinians on an hourly basis, 24/7. And you mentioned the ethnic cleansing. Well, the ethnic cleansing now, look at it in Lebanon. Burj
yes,
Barajneh, one of the biggest Palestinian refugee camps, has now been displaced again because Israel is threatening to bomb it. So sorry, that was a bit of a ramble from me, but Can you just talk about this? Maybe try to, for people to understand what we mean when we talk about this dismantlement of Zionism. And also, if you have any ideas of how the West, how this is going to happen in the West, because the tentacles of the Zionist movement are so deeply embedded in US, UK political systems, the EU very much the same.
So, look, maybe to start, I would like to agree very much with you, and also to set this out very explicitly, like you did, that calling for the end of Zionism, and also, in my case at least, the end of Israel, is not the same as a call for ethnic cleansing or mass violence of any kind. It isn't. And in that respect, I would compare it with what had to be done to Nazi Germany, in the sense that the people who claim that if you call for the end of Israel, you automatically call for mass violence against Jewish Israelis, forget that when Nazi Germany ended, nobody genocided the Germans.
Yeah.
Nobody did that. What was ended was this regime entirely, the state, not just the government, but the state, right? And as you have pointed out, what came next, what was then built on that, had enormous flaws. So that's where we come into this area, which you have rightly pointed out, where, in a way, if the same thing happened to Zionism, it would also contain a lot of errors, right? But it is similar in the fact, and it helps, I think, to elucidate this particular comparison, that people must understand that smearing those who, I think, inevitably now recognize that Israel must end with the brush of mass violence or the brush of attempting genocide or wanting genocide is absurd, absolutely absurd. A state can end without a genocide. It is also true, and I think a lot of people have not yet understood this, that states do not have rights to exist. No state has it, absolutely not. In the Israeli case, of course, there is an added level or layer of lying on top of that, right? Where the trick is, the sleight of hand is to say Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, which is shorthand for Israel has a right to exist as an apartheid state,
Yeah.
right? That's what this really means, which is completely absurd, and yet people buy into it. But even if we generalize, if we zoom out from this very specific, typical Zionist lie, right? States simply don't have a right to exist. That right does not exist. If states had a right to exist, then the rights of the Soviet Union would have been massively infringed when it was abolished. There were no such rights. The rights of East Germany were not heard when it was abolished. You can have a lot of problems with the abolition of East Germany and with what happened next. Yes, absolutely. But there was no right of existence because states have no right to exist. And that's a very good thing. That's a very good thing because states can be horrific. Imagine that Nazi Germany could have claimed a right to exist because, hey, we are there, so we have a right to exist, right?
That's a very good
No,
point.
no such right exists in international law, and it also makes no sense at all. So asking, or I would say demanding, that Israel must end is, in international law terms, perfectly legal. In fact, it makes sense. And it is also, I think, ethically compelling. Now, the Zionism aspect, right? Israel is, as you point out, is only one very powerful and violent aspect of this whole Zionist, really international complex, right?
Yeah.
I entirely agree with that too, and I've actually said it and written it occasionally. I do believe that the West has to destroy the Israel lobbies, all of them. The West can no longer live with the fact that there is a member of the international system, a real existing member, right? for better or worse, for worse really, that has arrogated to itself the right to subvert every other government in the world. That's Israel. Israel has arrogated to itself the right to subvert, if it can, every other sovereignty in the world.
Yes.
So sovereignty is a very abstract concept, but if we think in terms of political participation, right? I don't think there is a single democracy on this planet, right? Just to be clear, I don't think it exists. I think
Yeah.
democracy is an excellent idea, but it's an unrealized utopia as of now. And I
Yeah.
hope we get there one day. But there are, of course, luckily, precious elements of participation and democracy that have come into existence and that are worth defending and that we want to keep and that our elites constantly try to roll back and take away from us, right? So the other thing that Israel does, it arrogates to itself the right to take these elements of democracy, which are really all we have, away from all of us. Because, to put this very bluntly, in the case of Britain, you don't need a prime minister.
No.
Your prime minister, your Keir Starmer, is now our prime minister. He's doing what Israel wants.
Exactly.
You, the British, the voters, the people who actually live in this country, right? Forget it. Not
Yeah.
important. And Britain is, of course, only one such case. How exactly the Israeli-American relationship works, as there's a lot of arguments about this on the left as well. Right? Roughly, one side says, well, it's really the Americans who call the shots, and Israel is sort of their colony and a battering ram and a base. And the
Mm.
other side says, well, by now, at least it's the Frankenstein monster,
Yeah.
which you have described, which is wagging the dog massively. I think I'm sorry to be a historian. I think it's a very untidy mix between those two.
Yes.
But I do think when we go back to this question of what does this do to ordinary Americans, that Israel makes an enormous, deliberate, criminal contribution to diminish the little participation and representation that ordinary Americans have in the real world
Mm.
even more, right? Israel has by now managed to clearly bend policing and to an extent, even jurisprudence and the legal system in Germany, which is a case I observe a little bit. Now, again, that doesn't mean the Germans aren't to blame. Oh, yes, they are to blame. But the Israeli agency in all of this is very much there.
Yes.
And just to be clear once again, David Miller had, of course, to defend himself against this allegation for years, and he won in the end,
Mm.
as it were for all of us. Saying that, finally being clear about the fact that Israel is a highly entryist and subversive conspiratorial power that tries to undermine governments everywhere has nothing to do with anti-Semitism.
Mm.
Because we are not talking about the Jews, we are talking about Israel, right? There is a difference. But Israel is doing this, right? Zionists are doing this. And not all the Zionists who participate in this, for instance, very much in the United States, are actually even Jews, as we very well know. There is a whole sector of Christian Zionists who are part of this.
Yeah.
There also are, I think, agnostic Zionists by
Mm.
now, right?
Mm.
So, in all of these ways, it is true, I think, that the Palestinian struggle for liberation is extraordinary in the way that it is a linchpin struggle for the rest of the world. And I mean this literally, certainly for the West. The West does not deserve this enormous Palestinian sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
Nobody created this situation, I think, deliberately, but it is now a fact that, in a way, the Palestinians resist for all of us,
Mm.
right? And not merely, as it were, in quotation marks, as a matter of principle, which is very important. They also resist in the very concrete way that their struggle is the main front in the struggle against this political, terroristic, genocidal, supremacist, corrupting, perversive force that is also constantly targeting the West. And in the end, the struggle has to be won in both domains. Can it be won? Will it be won? I don't know. I hope so. I'm not giving up. But I think it's clear that that has to be the aim.
Yes, no, I agree completely. And actually, I was having this discussion with, who was it? Dr. Piers Robinson the other day, who you may know was instrumental in exposing the OPCW claims in Syria
Yes.
of chemical attacks,
Yeah.
etc. And, I guess this is very interesting for me because what I see is a balkanization of discussion. So I see the dissidents, let's not call them left or right, let's call them the dissidents or the dissenting voices in the West being very focused upon, the technocratic power grab, which again is very related, in my opinion, to the entire Zionist movement and tech surveillance, cyber tech, so on, development, which is becoming part of our societies in the West to a huge degree. You have Pegasus
Yes.
software, you have, all the AI and surveillance methodology that is being used to
Yes.
further oppress and kill Palestinians
Yes.
is being sold on the back of its success in achieving a genocide to the West.
Yes.
You know,
Literally.
so it literally, that's it. And my opinion, and I'm living in Syria, I've been here pretty much since 2016, and I've seen even the Syrian belief in that if they don't contain the Western generated terrorism in Syria, it's a disaster for Europe and for the West. That's literally how all the military that I ever spoke to, from, simple soldier up to general, that's how they spoke to me. So this is, for me, it's not only Palestine. Palestine is the core of this movement to prevent the incoming new order that Netanyahu is now starting to speak openly about, which
Which is,
will,
of course, a Nazi terminology,
yes,
literally.
yes,
The new order is
yeah,
just Nazi
exactly.
language.
But which will subvert the world, and we're already seeing the effects of it in the West, the loss of community, the disintegration of society, the disintegration of families. We're seeing it already coming in. But my opinion is, if the resistance axis is not successful in pushing back and destroying this movement, the world is going to be flung into something even lower than the lowest level of Dante's Inferno. That's how I feel. I don't know if you feel the same thing, but I just see it now, that it's becoming a war, a coalesced war. So we've seen, the war, the NATO war, using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia.
Mm.
But I think this war is going to develop into really a global war, an existential war. Do you also see this?
I definitely agree with you that there is an existential struggle, and the reason is that I would cast it a little differently, but I think it's very much converging with what you said. I think that we are at some sort of potential turning point where it is as if a new order is being tried out on us, right? And in this new order, an incredible degree of surveillance and the abuse of artificial intelligence for assassination and repression will be normalized. In this new order, war will be recast, or let me put this the other way around, genocide will be recast as war,
Yes.
right? We have seen this very much. This is what happened in Gaza, among other things, that the whole Western information warfare really turned on this one principle, which is No, we're not denying there's a war, but a war is a war, but we're denying there's a genocide. And by which they were actually normalizing genocide. That's
Yeah.
what they were doing, right? And I've always seen this from the beginning as the attempt to set a precedent in every sense of the word, legal, but also far beyond this, psychological in terms of what we call normalization, creating new baselines for the world, right? We are also being trained, and this hasn't happened for the first time again, but I do think we are at a threshold of some sort. We are being trained once again in being incredibly racist.
Yes.
And the racism is once again turned into the white noise of our Western civilization. We don't even say it anymore. It just is completely self-evident to everybody that all these brown people dying, they don't really matter. And we are
Yeah.
being trained to think like that. I give you a concrete example. You know, when the Iranian attack happened, I think 2 days ago, right? The ballistic
Yeah.
missile attack. I hardly watch BBC anymore. I just can't, you know, it's but okay, I watch a little bit of BBC, and there is this not particular terrible BBC person somewhere on the street in Israel, of course. Very ordinary, very average, representative in that sense. And he pretty much says something, it's almost verbatim, like, oh my God, who knows what comes next? Now this thing could really get out of control. And when you say that, and I don't think he had any idea what he was saying, what he was saying is everything that has happened until now, a year of genocide in Gaza,
Yes.
that wasn't out of control. That
Yeah.
is okay. That we can live with
Mm-hmm.
that. That's under control, right? And that's one example of this enormous racism. Or you have the mayor of Berlin, who is a horrific person, right? And an incredible Zionist, an incredible bully. I mean, he's also incredibly stupid and provincial, right? So he's daft enough to actually literally go after Israelis, right? Because they are not Zionist enough in his Berlin, literally, right? So this
God.
Kai Wegner comes out today with a tweet and it says, Mama, 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 don't you dare, you know, in any way welcome in my city what the Iranians have done because we will never accept a terror state, you know, and so on, and its actions. Now, the reality is that the Iranian state in this situation, this is actually the reality, is upholding international law in
Absolutely.
more than one way. It is actually one of the few states. The other one is Yemen, right? Hezbollah is
Yep.
also part of this, but Hezbollah is not literally a state. There are really only two states in the world that take the 1948 UN Genocide Convention seriously.
Mm.
Yemen, and I think of Yemen as run by the Houthis in reality, so don't call it the
Ansarullah.
Houthis, I call it Yemen. So
Yes.
Yemen and Iran are actually the only two states obeying a centerpiece of post-World War II international law, which is the 1948 Genocide Convention, right, by the
Mm.
UN. Everybody else is either shirking their duty, and it is a duty, or they're actually complicit or even co-perpetrating the genocide. That's where we really are. Um, Secondly, of course, any way you stretch it under international law, as the Iranians have rightly claimed, they had a crystal clear right to self-defense.
Yeah.
Absolutely clear-cut case. The only way you could, just as a footnote, try to sort of attack it is through the notion of immediacy, and you would be immediately slapped down, for which there are legal reasons which I won't go into because they're boring. But the upshot is it's a watertight case of self-defense, what the Iranians did.
Mm.
So, in at least these two aspects, this was exemplary behavior under international law. Third aspect, they didn't kill civilians. Can you imagine?
Absolutely. Yes.
An
This is.
army that carries out a major military strike doesn't kill a single civilian, one by accident, who
Mm.
tragically was a poor Palestinian man. I
Yeah.
know. And even he may have been killed ultimately because there was an interceptor from the Israelis
Yeah.
involved. Who knows? But the basic story is very, very clear. If the Iranians had wanted to act like the West acts, not just the Israelis, the West does this too,
Mm.
they would have massacred civilians. This
Yeah.
is what the West does, what the Israelis do We massacre civilians. We target them, right?
And
And then we
that's
call it,
extraordinary because, sorry, just to interrupt you quickly, because I'm getting attacked all the time by Zionist supporters and Western ignorance, willful ignorance, saying to me, but it wasn't a success. How many civilians did they kill? Them?
yeah,
Like,
it's
what?
unbelievable. Yeah, they're betraying
Yeah,
themselves. I've
yes.
seen that too. They're very much betraying themselves.
Sorry, I
So
interrupted.
just to round this off, and this dolt in Berlin, right, this provincial idiot who runs the capital of Germany, has the temerity to call Iran the terror state.
Yeah,
But back to my initial point, this is another example of the incredible racism that is also being normalized. It's always been there, I know, but I think an escalation of this racism is now normalized again in the West. So I agree, to come back to your question, I agree with you that this is some sort of turning point moment, threshold moment, tipping point moment. Something very important will be decided very soon, and it has a lot to do with Israel and Palestine, and the West, and then the rest of the world as well.
yeah, I agree. Also, just coming back to, as you rightly said, I mean, even Hezbollah, you're right, it's a non-state actor, although, and actually Lebanon doesn't currently have a government, hasn't
Yes, of
for
course.
years. But of
Yes,
course,
right.
Hezbollah are actually also part of the interim government. I think in
Yes,
the 2022
yes,
elections, they gained, or they had 13 seats in a
yes,
coalition. The name escapes me right now, but with one of the Christian political parties. And again, this is something that people in the West really don't understand. And of course, Christianity is being weaponized against organizations like Hezbollah by the Western media and by
yeah,
Israel. But in my opinion, I mean, if you look at the phalangists, of course, who acted as proxies of the
mm,
Zionists when they slaughtered Palestinians in
yes,
Sabra and Shatila in 1982, and who I would consider on the basis that they believe in the religious right for Israelis to be occupying Palestine, they form part of that group that you mentioned of
yeah,
Christian Zionists.
yeah, in effect to do.
Yeah. But coming back, Hezbollah has also avoided at all times harming
Yes,
civilians. They're
yes,
engaging on a military basis.
yes, absolutely.
Syria, very similar. I mean, Syria is a slightly different case. They are supporting the resistance in a myriad of ways that people are not aware of and have done throughout the regime change war that's been waged against them since 2011, and actually for decades, to be honest, since 1946. Iran, in both of their retaliations, have completely avoided civilian casualties.
Hmm.
The Iraqi resistance are only targeting military bases.
Yes,
Yemen,
yeah,
I mean,
it's a
how many
pattern.
people have died in Yemen's campaign to blockade the
Well,
Red Sea?
and if I may interject,
Yeah.
if you go back to when the campaign by Yemen started, right?
Mm.
They went out of their way not to harm sailors for a very long time, and I think
Yes.
they still are doing it.
Yes.
It is just a case that by now occasionally it has happened.
Mm.
But if they wanted to harm sailors on these ships, of course we would look at completely different figures. That's
Yeah.
very clear.
Exactly. And so, I think when these labels of terrorism are being thrown at these organizations and these states,
It's ridiculous by now.
it is entirely, it's projection, actually.
Yeah, it
And
is.
and
Yeah.
I just wanted to make one point that is really bugging me. Like in the UK, Hezbollah and Hamas are proscribed terrorist groups.
Yeah.
What threat do these groups put on British national security? None. Do they threaten Israel's security in their battle against the illegal occupation? Yes. So who is Britain representing? Who is the US representing? And
Yeah,
whose national security are they
yeah,
defending by
yeah.
prescribing these groups as terrorist
It's
groups?
not national security. It's
No.
not. It's again, it's the capture of governments
Mm,
by the Zionist project, where somehow the security of Britain is actually defined as the security of, or let's be more precise, as what Israel wants to define as its security, right? And this is done by now with such a fluidity that it's hard to even see it. It's being completely naturalized. You can even see it to an extent in American discourses when Nasrallah was murdered. You
mm,
know, it was pointed out, of course, that in one way or the other, his organization were involved in killing Americans. But as I think a Lebanese journalist underlined, and she was absolutely right about this, yes, to an extent that is true, but where were these Americans? They were
yeah.
in Lebanon. And when you invade another country and you encounter legitimate resistance, you may be killed. And that's an act of war. That's not a crime,
Mm,
actually, right?
mm,
So we are living in this completely topsy-turvy world where, and again, it also has a racist side where, in quotation mark, a brown person cannot hit back anywhere, not even in what is
exactly.
actually their own country, without being criminalized.
Mm,
Whereas, in quotation marks, a white person, they can hit everywhere, even outside their own borders, and it's always legitimate. This is the world we actually now live in. That's the real roots of the rules-based order. International law is something else. International law is very clear that if you invade a country and its inhabitants defend themselves and they kill you, they have committed no crime. Obviously not. When you look at the Israelis, I don't know, by now it's more, I think, but the first eight, I think, who were killed now, a day ago, I think,
mm,
in the invasion, in the ground invasion into southern Lebanon, you look at German newspapers, they're on the front page of some, and they treat them as if they were victims of terrorism.
ugh,
But they're wearing uniforms. They were crossing the border armed into another country to do that country and its people a lot of harm. They were going to war. So
yes.
if they're killed, well, that's it. That's actually very normal. And in fact, since they were invaders of a very brutal racist state, it's got to be welcomed. I have to be clear here.
Mm,
You know, when the Soviet army in World War II killed millions of Germans, was that a bad thing? No, because if they hadn't killed millions of Germans, Europe would now be under Nazi rule,
mm,
quite literally, right? That was the price for the liberation. And of course, as I always explain to my students, the Soviets were the ones who destroyed 80% of the German land forces, at
yeah.
least, right? So you may like the Soviets or you may not like them. I'm not a Stalinist, quite the opposite, but that's a fact. And so this
Mm,
killing of so many Germans and the shredding of all their material was an enormous service to humanity. You wouldn't put these Germans on a newspaper, front page, and mourn them,
mm,
except you're a Nazi, right? So it's completely insane. We treat genocidal troops, which the IDF are, as if they were teenager children that have done no harm and deserve no harm.
mm,
And we treat everyone in Lebanon, in Palestine, who is not an Israeli Jewish occupier, in Syria, and so on, in Iran, as having no rights at all, not the slightest right to even defend themselves.
yeah. No, that's. I completely agree with that. Just coming back to Iran, I guess what I wanted your opinion on is, there has been a degree of disappointment. There have been opinions saying that had Iran acted sooner in their legitimate
Mm,
retaliation for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran back in July,
yeah.
then maybe Syed Nasrallah would still be alive. The assassination would not have happened because Israel would not have felt so emboldened to, begin this blanket assassination. And this reminds me very much of the Nakba, of course. This killing of community leaders and their entire families, the killing of the commanders or anyone of influence, whether they are faith leaders, community leaders, militia leaders, didn't matter. That was their tactic, of course, taught to them by the British. If Iran, for example, I still have questions over the death of Raisi and Abdul Hayyan in the helicopter crash, especially now because we've seen what Israel can do with the dreadful. You talk about sadism, the pager.
I think these are justified questions. Yeah, I agree.
And then, of course, so we had this transition period into what is effectively a much more reformist, conciliatory, maybe, towards the West than Raisi and Abdul Hayyan were, who were very much aligned with the IRGC and with the resistance. Do you agree with this take that Iran was too slow in responding?
I'm of course aware of this issue, right? But who wouldn't be? And I've also, by the way, listened to and watched your discussion with Mohammed Marandi and with Kevork about this, and it was very, very interesting. And I am not in. I fear I'm really not in a position to take a strong position on that. And I'm not trying to cop out. So I'm going to explain why, because I know far too little. That's one thing. And I don't want to. I don't want to make a strong call on that, as it were, right? If you ask me, are the Israelis committing genocide? I make a very strong call, right? But in a way, I would almost say, let me put it like this: if you look at the Iranian problem, the problem that Iran has, to be so alone, not entirely, but in many ways, very alone, to have such a horrific enemy who is also armed with nuclear weapons. Israel is, of course, the worst nuclear rogue state on the planet because Israel, right? It's a problem with North Korea, but not with Israel. And they have missiles that can carry these warheads to Iran. So if you look at what Iran is, the problem it has to solve all the time, I really don't want to be too forgiving, as it were, with any leadership, but I would say it's understandable that some of the time you don't hit it. It's almost impossible to always get everything right here, right? The timing, the specific actions to be taken at a specific moment, and so on. Having said that, I find it one remark. I find it ironic that what may have turned into maybe an Iranian weakness in this process is that Iran is actually a democracy, and that this so-called mullah regime actually allowed Pezeshkian to be elected, right?
Yeah.
And to maybe actually make a difference too, right?
Yes.
So, and the punishment for that may have been, if this hypothesis is right, that at a specific moment they became hesitant. Let me put it like this, right? But once again, Pezeshkian this, Pezeshkian that, let's be fair to him as well. He did not create the enormous conundrum that they face objectively, right? The fact that this is such a very tricky problem they have to constantly manage. Now, let me put it slightly differently. What I would say is I personally was very afraid of one thing, namely that they wouldn't strike back after Nasrallah's murder.
Yes.
That was a moment where I felt I personally really didn't want to give in to panic. I didn't want to sit there and say, "Oh my God, the Israelis are almighty again," and everything is done. That really not for many reasons, factual reasons too. I think that wasn't a good reaction. But I also did think that at that point, the Israelis had put Hezbollah and the Iranians into a very dangerous place.
Mm.
Namely, if you strike back, you run a certain risk, right? But if you don't strike back, you may lose really so much credibility that in the end we will defeat you that way, right?
Yeah.
And in that sense, I was very relieved for other reasons as well, but I was also very relieved for that reason that then the Iranian leadership did make the decision and launched what was still a moderate attack, actually,
Mm.
but a much more substantial one than the one a few months ago. I think this was extremely important, and I think it's extremely important that they did actually some damage.
Just last question, I guess. What do you think will be the repercussions of this Iranian retaliation? And I have to keep hammering home, it's a
Yeah,
retaliation. It might be a few months ago, but it's still
yeah, yeah,
legitimate
yeah,
under
yeah,
international law.
absolutely.
This isn't
Because,
a, this isn't an
yeah,
isolated
yeah,
act of aggression. This is
yeah. It's a campaign. It's
yeah.
what under international law is called a campaign. And
Mm.
a state has a right to recognize a plausible campaign. So if somebody, I mean, let's just say it for hearers, to our listeners, if somebody comes to you with this idiotic argument, that is encapsulated in this one word, immediacy, and says, oh, the right of self-defense only works while you're under literal attack, that is not true. That is
Yeah.
literally not true. That is not the consensus in international law. The consensus in international law is obviously, because it makes sense, that a state has a right to come to a reasonable judgment that one attack is part of what's called a campaign and that more is coming. Moreover, a state has a right to take time after an attack to, for instance, gather resources, assess the situation, and also maybe look for alternatives, right?
Mm.
Because think about it. If you interpret the immediacy principle so extremely that you say the only time when a state can defend itself is when literally the rockets are impacting, right,
Yeah.
on its own territory, then you're basically saying a state should never look for an alternative to armed retaliation because you're saying if you even start looking, you've lost your option of armed retaliation. That's an
Mm.
insane idea. And of course, it's not the idea of international law. International law has a lot of weaknesses, but it's not that stupid, right? So international law very clearly concedes the right to states to take time after an attack, and it's still self-defense. Still defense. And with the Iranian cases, it's absolutely crystal clear. No two ways about it.
Yeah. But what do you think now? I mean, what do you think is going to be the immediate midterm and long-term repercussions of
Oh,
this attack?
but look, we all depend, don't we, on two sets of psychopaths. And I mean this quite literally.
Yes.
One concentrated in Israel and the other one in Washington,
Yeah.
right? Literally. And it's in their hands in how far they want to escalate this further. I cannot, I, I have no way of guessing what the Americans are about. That the American president, well, the senescent in chief, has come out and said, "Oh, I wouldn't like the idea of a strike on the nuclear installations in Iran." Doesn't tell me anything. It could mean that he really doesn't like it, but that probably doesn't matter because there are
Yeah.
other people who make the decisions by now. But it could also mean that they actually like the idea, all of them,
Exactly.
and they're
Yeah.
already preparing the deniability for their own side. So once it happens, they play the usual idiotic theater to which they're treating us, where Israel sets the world alight with American weapons, American logistics, American intelligence, American everything. And then America says, I'm very angry. I had a really tough word with
They didn't tell
Netanyahu.
us anything.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is for idiots, right? So we don't know. My upshot is I have no idea where the Americans stand on this. Moreover, it gets more complicated because we have no idea whether the Israelis care or not in the end. We don't really know that either, right? So we
Hmm.
can't know what these guys come up with. Now, one thing I find interesting here is, and important, first of all, we know that Hezbollah's military potential is mostly still there, which is
Yes.
very important. And we also know that Iran's military potential is still there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever they try, they will run into great resistance. We also know one footnote, and maybe it's just a footnote, and maybe it will be more, that the Israelis have for the first time openly struck at the Russians in Syria. They've
Yeah.
just done it, right?
Yeah.
The Hamin thing, that wasn't just a warehouse sort of outside the base. No, they struck at a Russian warehouse. And what's behind this is it seems that they're trying to interdict any sort of resupply from Iran,
Mm.
right? Israelis also know the Russians are talking to the Iranians and so on. So are the Israelis trying to actually draw the Russians in so that they can use that then as leverage with the Americans, right? That would be a Ukrainian move, right?
Yeah.
Or are they just completely insane and are so gone in their Heron mansion, their master race, hubris,
Yeah.
that they just want to take on the Russians and think that's a good idea? I don't know. But I think our chances are that the fight will get bigger. That
Yeah.
that is I think the more likely thing.
Well, and I think you do also have to bring in the kind of end time prophecy, the whole religious fanaticism that,
Oh, the people
Armageddon.
who actually want to make Armageddon
Yes.
happen because
Yes.
why not, right?
Exactly. I mean, but really, this is a reality. And it's
Yes, I
becoming
know.
more and more of a reality. And that's my fear. I don't consider any difference between Republican and Democrat. It's a uni-party. They're all under the control of whether it's the deep state, it doesn't, the military industrial complex, the Zionist movement, it's irrelevant. Um, but, if I look at Trump's followers, the majority are Christian Zionists.
Yes.
And Kennedy is an absolute rabid Zionist himself. Gabbard,
Yeah,
Musk,
yeah.
you know.
All
Uh,
of them. I'm not
I'm
saying
not
this
saying the
for balance,
Democrats
but
aren't, by the
no, no,
way.
I know. But apparently Walz has a little bit of that as well.
Yes,
And
yes,
I think they're really everywhere.
yeah.
It's
And
horrific.
so, this whole, people still slightly scoff at it. But I mean, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, that are, well, as Alistair Cook talks about regularly, they're creating the organ again.
Yes.
It never really went, in my opinion. It just got absorbed into, the official military. But we're seeing now that they are terrorists, effectively.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but this entire movement is very powerful, and this
Yes.
belief in the fact that they must create this Armageddon in order for the second coming of Christ and this entire messianic narrative. So, I always have that, although I try to keep myself very politically and militarily based in my opinions, but I still have that as an element of how Israel is going to act and how the US in particular is going to support that. I don't
Yeah,
know how
let me
many
put it
Christian
like
Zionists
this.
in Europe.
Yeah, let me
Don't
put
know.
it like this.
Mm,
It's not necessary to share delusions to understand that they
exactly.
exist and that they have real political power, you know.
Mm,
If you again, I'm sorry, but it's something I work a lot with, the
mm.
history of Nazism. If you had looked at Nazism in 1940, right, and they had already committed a number of enormous crimes, and they had, of course, waged several wars, and they just defeated France. You know, if you had been one of these sort of rationalists, right, who believes that everything that counts is somehow rational, even with the most insane people, you might have said, oh, yeah, they wrote all of this insane stuff about, Great Crusade in the East against the Bolsheviks. But why would they do this? They got so far, and that's so risky, right? But if you're a real realist, you take seriously how insane these people are.
Mm.
And in that case, you will be able to predict that within a year they will actually attack the Soviet Union, right? So I agree with you that we should take seriously how insane Zionists are.
Mm.
Jewish Zionists and Christian Zionists, and that some of these people, I mean, Mike Pompeo comes to work
Oh,
to
yeah.
mind as well. I think they're quite serious about,
Mm.
the rapture, the end days, and all this bullshit, frankly. But that doesn't make it less dangerous. That
Yeah,
doesn't make it less dangerous.
yeah, exactly. Tarik, really, I could keep speaking to you all night. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I would love to have you on again very, very soon if you have the time. I
Oh,
know that
yes,
you're
yes.
incredibly busy, but
No,
it
it's
was
okay.
fascinating. I learned so much from you, and I really
Thank you very
enjoyed.
much. The pleasure was all mine, and I've learned a lot. And I am learning a lot from you, actually, by the way.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you for your time and for your incredible insights. Really appreciate them, and I know the audience will appreciate them as well. Is there? Do you want to let people know where they can follow you? Like, for example, I know you're on X, but is there anywhere else where people can actually follow what you're writing and saying?
There are really three places. X is one. I have a Substack, and I regularly publish on RT. I do.
Good.
So those
Yes,
are the three
actually,
places.
I recommend everyone reads your latest. Britain goes full Orwell, accusing Putin of imperialism, which I just thought was a brilliant title. We actually covered that on UK Column News the other day
Thank
because it
you.
was just insane. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
as you
David
said, the
Lammy. I
world is,
mean,
yeah, I mean,
and what a coincidence. He's completely insane and a super Zionist toady, right?
yeah.
It fits again.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, his entire speech was complete
Yeah,
projection. It was extraordinary.
yeah.
Yeah, as you
I
said, the
picked
world
only
is,
one thing, it's true.
yeah, the world is completely upside down at the moment. But anyway, let's hope that at some point it's going to be righted and set back on a decent course to a future. Anyway, Tarik, again, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
take care. And really, I would love to have you on again very soon.
Oh, yeah, always. Thanks a lot.